Tonight we journey way back, before cubicles, before spreadsheets, before that one guy who microwaves fish in the break room, back to the dawn of what you might call the world's first office job. You're not just wandering ancient ruins tonight. No, you're clocking in, barefoot and bleary-eyed, to a civilization that hasn't even decided how many gods are too many. Welcome to Sumer, land of mud, math, and mandatory record-keeping. Picture this. You're standing ankle-deep in thick, warm sludge. The air smells like wet earth and sheep fur, and the sun's already glaring down like it skipped the snooze button. You squint toward a low skyline, a few ziggurats poking up like misplaced layer cakes in the endless flatness. This is southern Mesopotamia, around 3100 BCE, wedged between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And here, in what will someday be Iraq, humans are doing something completely unhinged for the first time. They're not moving. People are building, staying, farming, worshipping, and bless their sleep-deprived souls, organizing. You've joined a city called Uruk, or maybe Lagash. It's hard to tell, because nobody's really nailed down the spelling yet. But what is clear is that the marshes are being tamed by canals, goats are everywhere, and everyone has an opinion on fish storage. There's a faint hum of frogs and traders in the distance. The streets are wide enough for donkey carts and narrow enough that you can smell what someone had for dinner 3 houses down. You wade through the hubbub, past a boy shouting about date wine, toward a raised mud-brick platform. That's the temple. And inside, that's where your shift begins. The temple isn't just a holy place, it's also City Hall, the central bank, HR, and Amazon Prime all rolled into one. It's here that they keep track of offerings, inventory, construction plans, and food rations. It's also where some poor soul has to record it all. Guess who? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are listening from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the central courtyard, where chickens, goats, and scribes all sort of coexist in a state of barely managed chaos. A temple priest waves you over without looking up from his tablet. His old, smells like dried fish, and only speaks in grunts and side-eye. You hand over a list, 5 baskets of barley, 2 of emmer wheat, and 1 disturbingly moody ox. He grunts again and carves a few cuneiform marks into a damp clay square. You've just completed your first official office task. No high fives. No world's first employee mug. But your ox is now on record. What's wild is that none of this happened before people decided to settle. Nomadic bands didn't need paperwork. You didn't need an intern to count how many wild onions you picked that day. But once people started farming, stuff needed tracking. How much grain you owed the temple, who loaned who a goat, whether you paid your beer tax in full. And beer. Oh yes. It's currency, it's medicine, it's breakfast. But let's pause to appreciate the swampy brilliance of the Sumerians. They looked at a waterlogged floodplain filled with reeds, mosquitoes, and biblical heat and said, you know what? Let's build a civilization here. They drained marshes with dikes and ditches. They invented irrigation so precise that farmers could schedule their crops like spreadsheets. They built multi-room homes, city walls, and temples that required such advanced planning you're pretty sure some guy invented Gantt charts 5,000 years ahead of schedule. The land itself offered challenges. No forests, so no timber. No stone quarries. What they had was mud, so they made bricks. You slap mud into a wooden mold, let it dry under the blazing sun, and suddenly you've got modular office infrastructure. It wasn't all glory and invention, of course. You probably won't survive this job long term, between disease, heat stroke, and the occasional religiously justified human sacrifice. But for now, you've got a task, a stylus, and a deeply suspicious donkey to inventory. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians were the first true civilization. Some point to Egypt or the Indus Valley. But what makes Sumer stand out isn't just cities or temples, it's the paperwork. One quirky bit: their earliest writing didn't include poems or epic tales, it was all accounting. No love letters, no political manifestos. Just lists. Barley in, goats out. Humanity's first use of writing was, essentially, a receipt. And you're in the middle of it. You watch as a farmer hauls in jars of sesame oil, and a scribe makes a tiny triangle mark that represents 60. A priest mutters about the goddess Inanna's weekly offerings. Someone's yelling about counterfeit fish tokens. Welcome to your first day on the job. At night, the stars blaze with ancient clarity. There's no light pollution, no buzzing neon signs. Just a million-year-old sky blinking silently above canals and mud walls. You sit outside the temple, dust on your tunic, stylus stuck in your sash, brain pulsing from trying to remember if you counted 7 sheep or 8. Your coworker hands you a jug of date beer. You sip it. It tastes like syrup and old shoes. He grins. Better than the water, he says. And that's the moment. The flicker of something strangely familiar. You've got co-workers. You've got responsibilities. You've got forms to fill out, people to answer to, and a growing suspicion that someone's hoarding extra onions and not reporting them. The office job, its stress, its rituals, its tiny victories and enduring weirdness is here. And you're in it, 5,000 years before anyone calls it a 9 to 5. The temple courtyard is already buzzing when you arrive, barefoot again, because your one pair of sandals gave up during last week's flood. A dozen workers line up, each lugging sacks of barley, dried fish, or something that smells suspiciously like fermented turnips. Your job: make sure every crumb gets logged. Grain doesn't just fall from the gods. After all, it has to be counted, weighed, and recorded. A priest gestures at you to get moving. You squint toward the central storeroom, a huge, cool mud brick chamber lined with clay jars and woven reed baskets. It's barely sunrise, but you're sweating like it's noon in a bread oven. You grab your reed stylus, smooth a tablet of soft clay with your palm, and take your place at the tiny reed mat desk. Welcome to the Sumerian equivalent of Excel. Let's be honest, this isn't glamorous work. But in this world, being trusted to handle the temple's grain ledger is a mark of high regard. You're literate, which already puts you above most citizens. And you understand how to manage numbers, well, sort of. You're still getting used to the base 60 counting system. 60 as the fundamental unit, because 10 fingers and 12 knuckles was apparently a math flex back then. Today's task: count the barley brought in from 3 districts. The units. It's not kilos, it's sila, roughly 1 liter. Except sometimes it's gur, or ban, and no one seems entirely sure what changed since last year. You sigh and scratch a quick wedge mark next to 284 sila, Northern Canal. That's the 3rd time this week they brought extra and insisted it was for the gods. Sure it is. You learn early that temple economy is 70% logistics, 20% creative grain justification, and 10% not angering divine powers. Everything goes through the temple: crops, taxes, trade, sacrifices, even festivals. And that makes the people working in it, like you, a strange hybrid of religious intern, math tutor, and part-time detective. Here's where it gets weirder. Each offering isn't just about feeding the priests. It's feeding the gods themselves. The temples prepare daily meals for statues, actual physical meals of meat, bread, beer, and incense. You can't help but wonder if Enlil and Enki ever argue over who gets the best dates. Historians still argue whether these offerings were symbolic or if the people truly believed their gods consumed physical food. Either way, someone had to calculate portions, inventory supplies, and make sure no temple assistant was sneaking bites. And you're that someone now. You spend your afternoon handling dispute forms. Yes, even 5,000 years ago, people complained about who got the bigger barley basket. One farmer insists his delivery was 40 sila, not 30. You poke around the damp clay impressions and spot a faded seal mark from the canal district. Definitely 30. He glares. You shrug. Another day, another angry man in a wool skirt yelling about barley theft. A fringe theory you've heard floating around the scribe room says the temple created these kinds of jobs on purpose, not just to manage resources, but to keep idle people busy. You've seen it yourself. When someone isn't digging canals, tending goats, or pushing around clay tablets, they start worshipping strange new minor deities or composing aggressive poems. So perhaps this job isn't just admin, it's ancient public safety. Lunch break is short, just enough time to gnaw a dried fig and sip lukewarm barley beer under the shade of a fig tree. A merchant walks by boasting about his trip to Dilmun, trading lapis lazuli and copper. You've never been farther than the edge of the irrigation ditch. But you write down his name and cargo anyway, just in case it turns up in next week's audits. The temple's grain records are a labyrinth, written in dense cuneiform rows pressed deep into clay. Each record has to be stored, cross-referenced, and occasionally dried over fire to make it permanent. You've got shelves of these things, thousands of clay tablets organized by year, region, and whether or not anyone spilled goat milk on them. You've also started noticing a pattern. Certain priests favor certain farmers. Some get better rates, faster acceptance of offerings. Is it nepotism? Divine inspiration? Historians still argue whether favoritism in Sumerian temple economics was systemic or incidental. But you're starting to develop that inner office spidey sense. Something's off with the barley from the southern fields. You make a mental note. By late afternoon, your fingers are sore, your tunic is crusted with dried clay, and your stylus has snapped twice. But you finish reconciling the last tablet of the day, a summary of all temple grain stores, offerings, and outflows. You tuck it into the drying shelf and exhale through your teeth. One priest walks by, muttering something about a missing fish ledger. You pretend you didn't hear. Then comes your least favorite part of the day, translating temple decrees into numeric form. The goddess Inanna shall receive offerings of, and then there's a whole poetic passage about glowing eyes and baskets of stars. You somehow have to interpret that into actual deliverables. You're starting to suspect ancient poetry is just a clever way to dodge accountability. Quirky detail. Some ledgers are sealed with tiny cylinder seals, beautiful carved stones that roll across clay to leave unique imprints. Each one tells a story. Yours. It's a scene of two goats headbutting in front of a tree. You chose it for fun. Your supervisor says it's unprofessional. You secretly love it. By sundown, the temple shadows stretch long across the street. You rinse your hands in the canal, flick a mosquito off your forehead, and stretch your aching spine. The last batch of barley is secured, sealed, and ready for divine accounting. You pause before heading home. A little boy runs past you laughing, his arms full of clay scraps. Somewhere down the alley, you hear someone playing a stringed instrument, maybe a lyre. Life continues around you, messy and loud and beautiful in its own strange rhythm. You know you'll be back tomorrow, counting more barley, smoothing more tablets, translating more vague fish-related blessings. But for now, you take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let the night settle over the city like a warm clay blanket. It starts with a lump of clay. You sit cross-legged on a reed mat in the temple courtyard, holding the future in your palm. Soft, damp, and slightly warm from the sun, the clay doesn't look like much. But with a sharp reed stylus and the right pressure, it becomes a tablet, a record, a message, a tiny slab of bureaucracy that might outlive entire cities. Today, You're learning the real reason why scribes rule the temple roost: writing. No, not the flowery ode to the god of the left-handed bull kind of writing. This is the practical stuff: lists, counts, receipts. Writing not to inspire, but to remember. Not to dream, but to prove. The stylus in your hand is cut from a reed stem, shaved to a point on one end and flattened on the other. It's clumsy, especially when your fingers are sweaty and your supervisor is breathing down your neck with all the subtlety of a coughing ox. Still, you press the tip into the clay. First a wedge, then a line. Then another. You're copying a standard inventory: 3 goats, 7 jars of oil, 2 baskets of lentils. This system is called cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge-shaped, though the Sumerians wouldn't know that they're too busy inventing it. You practice symbols until your hand cramps. Horizontal wedge for sheep. Diagonal wedge for field. Squiggly wedge for, well, something that might be a chicken, or might just be bad handwriting. At first, you wonder why they didn't just draw pictures. They used to, you're told. But pictures get messy. Abstract shapes, oddly enough, are harder to misinterpret. It's one of those quirks that makes you appreciate how sophisticated this system really is. Sure, it looks like someone dropped a fork in wet sand, but it works. Historians still argue whether cuneiform developed purely for accounting or also for ritual purposes. What you do know is that once the stylus hit the clay, everything changed. Stories, laws, receipts, royal decrees, now they could be written down, stored, referenced. Suddenly, memory didn't rely on memory anymore. A senior scribe leans over and squints at your tablet. You made the symbol for cow backwards, he says. You just recorded a cartload of angry demons. You sigh and start over. Later, you get your first real assignment, documenting a temple transaction. You're taken to a shady spot under a fig tree, where a minor priest and a merchant are arguing over how many fish were delivered last week. There's no shouting, just stiff smiles and long pauses. This is diplomacy, Sumer style. You press the stylus into the clay with practiced calm. Names, goods, quantities. You roll your seal across the bottom, goats headbutting under a tree, still your favorite, and hand the tablet to the priest for his approval. He grunts. That's as close to praise as you're going to get. You're officially a working scribe. From here, the job shifts. You're no longer just logging inventory. Now you're making permanent records. Your tablets will go into temple archives, shelved by date and subject. If someone steals an ox, your writing might decide their fate. One fringe tale making the rounds among scribes says that somewhere in the north, a priest faked a grain receipt to cover up a missing shipment. The punishment: 10 days of temple cleaning and an official cursing by 3 different gods. You double-check your fish tallies after that. There's something oddly comforting about working with clay. It's earthy, tactile, grounding. Every mistake is fixable, just smear it and start over. But once it's dry, it's forever. Like a fossilized to-do list. By midweek, you're spending hours each day hunched over your mat, stylus dancing. You're writing not only for now, but for the future. People you'll never meet will read your tablets. They'll know what happened on this day, in this temple, in this city. And maybe they'll marvel at how organized it all was. They won't. They'll mostly wonder why no one had chairs. Your co-workers are a mixed bunch. One guy writes beautifully but smells like spoiled olives. Another can't remember the symbol for barley but insists he once had tea with the king's nephew. You trade gossip between tablets. Someone's dating a priestess in secret. Someone else lost a week's worth of records in a canal and tried to blame it on a goat. Quirky fact: scribes often learned by copying practice tablets line by line. Some even carved in little notes like "this is dumb" or "I'm hungry" at the bottom of their assignments. You relate deeply. You begin noticing small efficiencies in your own work, symbols forming faster, lines getting cleaner. You even start experimenting with stylus angles for flair. A little scribal swagger never hurt anyone. One afternoon, your instructor hands you a battered tablet, its surface pitted and uneven. "Copy this exactly," he says. "It's a treaty between two city-states. Very old. Very important." You nod, heart fluttering a little. This isn't fish inventory. This is real history. You cradle the ancient tablet like it might crack if you breathe wrong. As you work, you realize something. The more people write, the more they need writing. More transactions, more treaties, more disputes, it all creates an endless cycle of paperwork. You smile. Somehow, the first office job wasn't invented by design. It happened because people needed to keep track of their own mess. By evening, your fingers are stiff, your eyes gritty. You sit back and stretch, feeling the warm breeze off the canal. Frogs chirp. Someone's cooking onions again, badly. You stare at your last tablet of the day. It's neat, balanced, clear. Maybe not poetic, but certainly official. And as the stars blink overhead, you realize something quietly extraordinary. You just helped civilization remember itself. You're hunched over a fresh clay tablet, halfway through recording the delivery of 6 goats and a suspiciously small amount of wool, when a shadow falls across your mat. You glance up, and there he is. The bearded, robed tower of authority that is your immediate superior. You know the type. His beard is so meticulously braided it probably has its own scribe, and his seal features an elaborate scene of the god Enlil smiting chaos with a measuring stick. He doesn't speak. He just raises one eyebrow, the universal ancient expression for "you're redoing this." You sigh, wipe the clay clean, and start again. Welcome to office life in 2900 BCE. Temple bureaucracy is a towering pyramid of grumpiness. At the top, the high priest, a man so wrapped in gold and incense he barely seems human. Beneath him, supervisors like your beardy nemesis, who specialize in 3 things: giving vague instructions, taking all the credit, and smelling faintly of goat butter. At the bottom, you, and the interns who forgot how to spell lentil. Every day, you navigate this bureaucratic ecosystem, dodging blame, deciphering half-baked requests, and doing your best not to offend anyone with enough status to have their own laundry scribe. This morning's task: transcribe 3 land grants and 4 debt settlements. Simple enough, except the priest of Ningle insists you use the correct divine honorifics, while the temple tax officer wants everything simplified for efficiency. Neither understands the other's handwriting. You're stuck in the middle, stylus in hand, trying to figure out how to phrase "your ox cart is impounded" until further notice in a tone that won't get you smote. You get the sense that paperwork is not just a necessity, it's a performance. The way you phrase a report, the way you press a seal, the way you leave space between symbols, it all sends signals about status and intent. You're not just documenting, you're navigating social landmines in clay. Historians still argue whether these early bureaucracies were truly centralized or just loose networks of temple cliques trying to outmaneuver each other. From your viewpoint, it's a bit of both. One day, you're told to prioritize the barley inventory. The next, you're translating a marriage contract for the high priest's cousin's cousin, because it's urgent. Right. Still, there are moments of bizarre clarity. One afternoon, you're called to a meeting in the temple's inner garden. You sit cross-legged with 3 other scribes while an elder dictates a land dispute. 2 families are fighting over a date palm that grew exactly between their plots. The debate's been going on for 6 years. You draw the property lines on clay, adding tiny palm trees and canals. By the end, nobody's happy, but the tablet is sealed. Case closed. A quirky detail you pick up from a veteran scribe: The beard length of your supervisor correlates directly with how many times he'll change his mind mid-instruction. You start taking bets with your fellow scribes. It's the closest thing to fun you're allowed. Lunch is the usual: a flat barley cake, a handful of lentils, and half a cup of beer so thick it might qualify as stew. You sit under the same fig tree, swapping horror stories with the scribe from the West storeroom. He had to transcribe a divorce contract involving 12 goats, a haunted loom, and a clause about seasonal bread custody. You wince. That's next level HR. In the late afternoon, you're summoned by the grain administrator, an older man with the sun-worn skin of someone who hasn't seen shade in 20 years. He hands you a list and says, "These totals don't match." You glance down. The discrepancy is 3 sila of lentils. That's about 1 lunch. You point this out. He stares at you. You nod. "I'll triple-check the tablets." Bureaucracy doesn't care about scale. A missing donkey hoof or a miscounted fish can spiral into full audits. There's even a room in the temple filled entirely with problem tablets. You've started calling it the Chamber of Regret. And yet, despite all the tedium, something strange is happening. You're getting good at this. You can read messy cuneiform upside down. You've memorized hundreds of logograms. You've even developed a way to record fish types in half the symbols. Efficiency, baby. One day, you're handed a particularly delicate assignment: inscribing an oath-bound agreement between 2 feuding families. These people hate each other with the burning passion of rival goat breeders. If your tablet wording offends either side, things could get messy, curse-level messy. You choose your words like a diplomat. Equal phrasing. Mutual offerings. Generous but vague timelines. You roll both family seals onto the clay with surgical precision. When you hand it over, neither side smiles, but no one hurls a sandal, so you call it a win. That night, you lie on your mat, listening to frogs outside your window and the faint sound of someone drunkenly reciting a hymn to Dumuzi. You stare at the stars, wondering if the gods have supervisors too. You realize that despite the power struggles, the scribal errors, and the endless sea of barley math, this work is more than data. These tablets are stories about people trying to survive, thrive, and occasionally steal a cow or 2. And you're part of it. You, with your smudged tunic and cracked stylus. You're not just surviving the bureaucracy. You're shaping it, one wedge at a time. You're barely through your morning beer porridge combo when someone bursts into the courtyard shouting, "The gods need inventory." Of course they do. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and jog toward the temple storerooms, stylus already in hand. The head priest of Enlil is there, flanked by 2 wide-eyed assistants holding incense burners like nervous toddlers with fireworks. He thrusts a wooden tablet toward you. He prefers wood, more dramatic, and barks, "Find the sacred copper. It's not where it should be." You blink. The sacred copper. Of course. The alloy no one touches, used only for ceremonial blades and the decorative toe ring of the god Ninurta. Time to track it down. This is your new reality, divine accounting. The gods of Sumer aren't content with just being worshipped. They demand paperwork. And lots of it. Every sacrifice, every offering, every divine-owned goat needs to be logged, verified, and often double-checked because, let's be honest, some temple staff have sticky fingers and an impressive appetite for ceremonial beer. You flip through your last week's ledgers. 4 copper rings received from a Dilmun merchant, logged under offerings, minor ritual tools. You pull the corresponding clay tablet and march down to the vault with the guard whose main qualification seems to be owning a spear. Inside, the copper is there. A little tarnished, but present. You make a note on a fresh clay tablet: sacred copper confirmed, no theft, no divine wrath imminent. And just like that, the gods can sleep easy tonight. But don't relax just yet. Because now the same priest wants you to tally the divine livestock. You head to the pens. It's hot. It smells like wool and indignity. Each animal has a name, a symbolic meaning, and a dietary requirement more complicated than your cousin's wedding caterer. One cow is beloved of Inanna, 2 sheep are sacred twins of the moon god, and there's a chicken with a commemorative headdress no one can explain. You record it all. Carefully. One mistake and you might be blamed for an eclipse or a surprise locust swarm. It's moments like these you realize your office job isn't just administrative, it's cosmic. You're not just keeping track of temple property. You're balancing the scales between the mortal world and the divine. Every tablet you press is, in theory, helping maintain the sacred order of the universe. Historians still argue whether Sumerians literally believed the gods read these records, or if it was more symbolic, an elaborate ritual form of seeing the divine. But judging from the fear in your supervisor's eyes when he miscounts the sacred incense sticks, there's definitely anxiety about cosmic audits. One quirky story floats among the scribes. A junior accountant once forgot to tally 2 baskets of pomegranates meant for Nana, the moon god. That night, the moon turned red and wolves howled non-stop until someone offered a peace goat. Coincidence? Probably. But no one forgets the fruit tally now. By midday, you're knee-deep in divine inventory forms. The gods need 3 clean tunics, 1 ceremonial cart, wheel optional, 12 liters of beer, strong and bubbly, 1 talking statue, status, still not talking. And all of this has to be checked against the monthly tribute schedule. You lay out the tablets in neat rows, cross-reference delivery seals, and try not to drip sweat onto the soft clay. It's a delicate dance between reverence and logistics. That afternoon, a shipment arrives, 10 jars of sesame oil, 5 carved bowls, and 1 extremely heavy stone idol. You log the goods, noting the merchant's name, origin, and the seal impression he rolled with a theatrical flourish. It features a lion wrestling a cucumber. You raise an eyebrow. He nods proudly. For fertility, he says. Sure. There's a quiet pride in your work. Every mark you make, every seal you press, becomes part of a sacred record. One day, someone may open these archives to settle a dispute, schedule a festival, or prove that yes, the god Marduk did receive a golden bird figurine on the 5th day of the barley moon. At one point, you assist with a purification ceremony. Not the flashy one with music and smoke, but the boring part where you list the materials used: oils, woods, resins, cloths, and then tally what's burned versus what remains. It's spiritual cleanup meets fire hazard checklist. You accidentally drop a wet tablet and smear a line. Suddenly it reads, the god Enlil receives 1 fat sheep and 5 demons. You re-etch quickly. No need to summon anything today. As the sun drops behind the ziggurat, casting long golden shadows over the city, you finish your final task, logging the returns. That's right, some gods actually return offerings. Burnt bones, empty wine jars, incense ash. It all comes back. And guess who gets to tally it? You write slowly, deliberately, the stylus cool in your fingers as the heat fades from the air. You seal the tablet, set it on the drying rack, and sit back. The courtyard is quiet now. A few priests chant in the distance. A donkey complains somewhere near the water gate. You stretch your legs, your mind still echoing with wedge marks and ceremonial measurements. For all the chaos, the uncertainty, and the literal goat counting, you've begun to understand the sacred rhythm of it all. The gods may be unknowable, their moods mercurial, but your job makes them tangible, trackable, real. You didn't choose this path, but somehow, it's yours. And as you watch the stars emerge, shimmering above the temple like tiny cuneiform dots in the sky, you realize something strange. Maybe the divine was never about thunder and miracles. Maybe it's about getting the inventory right. The temple courtyard is barely stirring when you arrive, breath fogging in the early morning chill. You've gotten into the habit of showing up first, not because you're eager, but because if you don't, someone else will accidentally take your stylus and leave you with the bent one that writes like a goat hoof. Office politics are alive and well, even in 2900 BCE. Today, the gods rest. But you don't. It's logistics day, your favorite kind of nightmare. You've just been reassigned again. Apparently, your attention to detail in divine goat management has earned you a new role, assistant to the temple administrator. You're not exactly thrilled. It means less stylus work, more running around answering questions like did we ever get that fish from Eridu? And why is there a merchant sleeping in the west storeroom? Still, it's a step up. Technically, your new job is part courier, part inventory controller, and part translator of wildly vague temple requests. One moment, you're chasing down missing bundles of flax, the next, you're decoding an order for 7 containers of ceremonial pigment, but not the itchy kind. You have a little reed-bound list hanging from your belt, with checkboxes carved into clay. It's your lifeline. You keep it hidden because if anyone finds out how organized you are, they'll make you do all the scheduling. You start your rounds at the granary. The steward there, Marder, an old man with 2 teeth and no sense of urgency, tells you that the expected grain shipment is late. Again. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Probably arguing over whose ox gets to pull the cart, he says, then offers you a figure. It's moldy. You politely decline. From there, you head to the storehouse of offerings. A junior scribe waves you down with a panicked look and thrusts a tablet into your hand. You know seals better than me. Is this a forgery? You glance at the clay. The seal is a mess, uneven, shallow, and way too symmetrical. It looks like someone tried to carve it from a turnip. You nod slowly. Fake, you say. And poorly faked. The kid deflates. You pat his shoulder and make a mental note. Someone in the merchant quarter is trying to sneak oil into the temple under a false seal. Not your department anymore, but you'll quietly pass it to someone who likes dealing with that kind of drama. Still, the pace never stops. You deliver 3 inventory tablets to the priests of Inanna, who are arguing about a festival schedule that definitely overlaps with a beer ration ceremony. You suggest combining the events. One of them scoffs, the other nods thoughtfully. You leave before they start throwing date cakes. Your job is to keep things moving, deliver messages, translate numbers, report inconsistencies, occasionally smooth things over when 2 temple functionaries have a passive-aggressive meltdown over who gets access to the best incense rack. You've become fluent in temple tone. When someone says, "We'll consider that suggestion," what they mean is, "We're absolutely ignoring you but might steal your idea later." When someone says, "We appreciate your attention to detail," they mean, "Please stop correcting my spelling in front of witnesses." Quirky detail. The temple uses a kind of claymail system. You write a message on a tablet, wrap it in a thin clay envelope, and seal it with a cylinder. The recipient cracks it open like a ceramic fortune cookie. It's absurdly satisfying. You start adding doodles on the outside. Goats, mostly. Historians still argue whether these admin roles were chosen by merit, social status, or just who could read without squinting. In your case, you suspect it's because you once alphabetized an entire storeroom of wine tablets without being asked. A decision you now regret. Greatly. You stop by the outer gate just before midday. A group of messengers from Umma has arrived, dressed in heavy wool cloaks and looking cranky from the journey. They carry tablets, wrapped and sealed. You recognize the mark, Umma's Envoy Guild. Always dramatic. You usher them inside, offer barley beer, and prepare a reception tablet. One of the younger messengers smirks at your goat seal. You smirk back. Better than your flaming onion, you mutter. The real work begins when the high priest's assistant drags you into a side room with the new tablets. We need to count their tribute, he says. Twice. The tablets list oil, livestock, lapis lazuli, and one suspiciously vague item, special fragrant powders. You suppress a sigh. No one ever labels their contraband properly. You log it all, sign the acceptance tablet, and hand over your official seal. The envoy grumbles about tax rates, mutters something about Uruk being unreasonable, and leaves. You eat half a lentil cake to celebrate surviving the meeting without being cursed. Late in the day, you run into your old supervisor, the beardy one with the attitude and the hero complex. He looks surprised to see you in a new tunic and carrying your own stylus pouch. Oh, he says. You've been promoted. You smile. The same bland smile he used on you for months. Apparently someone liked my barley audits, you say. He grunts. You win. By the time the sun sets, you've walked the full width of the temple complex 6 times, dodged 3 minor arguments, logged 128 items, corrected 4 spelling errors, and accidentally discovered that the goddess Nancha's shrine has been using the same ceremonial robe for over a decade. You'll deal with that tomorrow. For now, you sit by the ziggurat's base, the brick warm from a day of sun, and you let the soft wind cool your face. A scribe walks past, humming. Somewhere, a priest chants the evening hymn. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the noise fades into background, just patterns, like the cuneiform you press into clay. Repetitive. Predictable. Beautiful, in a way. You are, somehow, at peace. Which probably means someone's about to lose a shipment of onions and drag you back into a clay-fueled crisis. But for now, you breathe. You wake before dawn to the sound of someone yelling about fish. Not a war cry. Not a religious chant. Just one very tired man yelling, "The fish are missing," as he stomps barefoot down the temple corridor with the urgency of someone who knows how angry gods can get when their lunch goes missing. You sigh, roll off your mat, and splash water on your face. The temple kitchens are already smoky and hot, filled with the smells of charred onions, boiling grain, and slightly overripe carp. You follow the yelling until you find the cook, a wiry man with a face like sun-dried leather, standing over an empty reed basket. There were 12 fish, he says. Now there are 6. You look around. No signs of struggle. No fish scales on the floor. No suspicious cats. You ask the cook if he counted properly. He glares at you like you just insulted his mother and his soup in the same sentence. Welcome to the ancient world of temple supply chain management, where a missing fish is both a culinary inconvenience and a potential religious crisis. Today, your job is to audit the temple kitchens. You're not thrilled. It's hot, noisy, and everyone resents you being there. The head cook thinks you're a glorified snitch. The junior priests think you're a failed poet. And the dish boy keeps trying to convince you that 3 jugs of oil can just mean some oil, vibes-based. You dig in anyway. The temple kitchen isn't just for feeding priests and ceremonial guests. It also feeds the gods. Not metaphorically, actually. Meals are prepared daily and brought before the statues of major deities, served on fine platters with incense wafting like divine room spray. Historians still argue whether the gods were believed to eat these meals or simply absorb their essence. Either way, the food has to be real, fresh, and precisely accounted for. You inspect the pantry, baskets of onions, garlic, and cucumbers, piles of barley and emmer wheat, and hanging cuts of meat from recently sacrificed animals. There's a sack labeled "Very Important Lentils." You don't ask. The fish situation becomes clear when you check the delivery tablet. 12 fish received. 6 entered the storeroom. The other 6 offered to Nanshi. You raise an eyebrow. The cook shrugs. Nanshi likes fish. You flip through last week's offerings. Nancy did get fish, but also wheat, honey, and a small jade figurine. No one mentioned doubling the portions. You smell a cover-up, or at least a very fishy excuse. You make a note, 6 fish diverted to secondary offering unconfirmed. The truth is, temple kitchens operate on a blend of devotion, tradition, and sheer chaos. Each god has preferences. Inanna gets sweet things. Enlil prefers meat. Nana, the moon god, has a weird thing for dairy. You wonder how they decided any of this. Did someone once see a cloud shaped like a cheese wheel and declare it divine will? You find a scribe's cheat sheet near the cooking area. It lists which gods are gluten-free, none, which need red wine, 3, and which refuse to eat on cloudy days, possibly symbolic, possibly petty. Quirky detail, meals for statues are plated and arranged like fine banquets, then placed before the deity's image. After a few hours, the food is quietly removed and usually eaten by the temple staff. You now understand why the priests are so motivated to keep the gods well fed. By midday, you're knee-deep in clay tablets and trying to match food deliveries with usage reports. You find one glaring inconsistency. A shipment of imported spices from the east was marked burned for blessing, but no burn tablet exists. You investigate. The incense priest, a lanky man who always looks vaguely haunted, admits they didn't burn it. It didn't smell right, he says. You raise an eyebrow. So you stored it. He looks away. Mostly. You check his personal pouch. It smells amazing. You make another note, spice audit required. By late afternoon, you sit with the head cook to finalize the week's summary. He's grumbling, but cooperative now that you didn't accuse him of theft. He just wants the kitchen to run. You help him adjust the ratios for the Inanna festival, twice as many cakes, half as much garlic. You also suggest keeping a tally tablet by the kitchen entrance, so deliveries can be marked immediately. The cook mutters something about scribes and their fancy clay, but agrees. Progress. As the sun begins to dip, you sit back and look over the day's work. You've updated 8 inventory tablets, initiated a spice review, rebalanced the fish-to-prayer ratio, and confirmed that, yes, the gods will still receive dinner tonight. The junior priest from Nansha's temple walks by and says, "Nice work catching that fish thing. She hates being shorted." You look at him. He shrugs. Just a feeling. You don't ask questions. Instead, you walk through the quiet temple corridors toward the outer courtyard. The kitchens still hum with low activity, but the worst is over. The statues are fed, the offerings made, the ledgers logged. No divine wrath today. You pass the statue of Enki, god of wisdom, seated serenely with flowing water carved around his feet. Someone's placed a little dish of honey beside him. Not protocol, but sweet. You smile and think, in a city run on offerings, paperwork, and the occasional misplaced cup, maybe the smallest gestures carry the most weight. You press your stylus back into your pouch and head for home, feet aching, head full of spices and seals, and the faint satisfaction of knowing you kept both gods and kitchens balanced for one more day. You're halfway through your first sip of morning beer when someone slaps a wet clay tablet onto your lap. Emergency, the messenger wheezes. There's been a flood. You blink. You're indoors. Your tablet's now soggy. You sigh, stand up, and go investigate. Outside, the eastern irrigation canal has overflowed again, because, surprise, the embankments weren't repaired like they were supposed to be. You trudge through ankle-deep water, sandals squelching with every step, until you reach the edge of the mess. The temple courtyard looks like a barley soup nightmare. Workers are scrambling to move grain stores onto higher platforms. A merchant is yelling about wet wool. And a small herd of goats, decidedly not divine, has taken the opportunity to stage a joyful, chaotic breakout. Welcome to Disaster Management, Sumerian edition. You're pulled aside by a senior scribe with worry creased into his forehead like a poorly folded tablet. We need to assess the damage, he says. Fast. And just like that, you're back to doing what scribes do best, making order out of mud. First stop, the grain storage units. Half are dry. The other half, not so much. You find a few waterlogged tablets floating like sad little boats among scattered barley. You rescue what you can, blotting excess moisture with your tunic, then rewriting the worst cases from memory. You're not supposed to rely on memory, but hey, crisis mode. Historians still argue whether Sumerians had formalized emergency protocols or just trusted in the gods and yelled until things dried. Judging by today, it's mostly the second one. You climb onto a crate and start calling out counts while assistants run inventory. Some workers are trying to fake their numbers, blaming the flood for stock that was already missing, but you're wise to them. One tried the same thing during last year's locust infestation. You still remember. Quirky detail. Temple storerooms often had clay pegs embedded in the walls at regular heights, functioning like early flood markers. You check today's waterline, it's past the third peg. That's trouble, but not call the astrologer's level. You make a note of it anyway. Next up, livestock audit. You corner a priest who's frantically trying to corral drenched sheep back into their pen. He's not thrilled to see you, but you need numbers. How many were here this morning? He hesitates. All of them. How many is that? 12. You narrow your eyes. You had 15 yesterday. He sighs and points to a clump of reeds where a soggy goat is pretending to be invisible. You add it back to the tally and move on. You document all of this on a fresh clay slab. It's hard writing when your stylus is damp and your clay keeps turning to soup, but you adapt, press harder, keep your strokes sharp. The work must go on. By midday, the temple admin team meets in a circle. Everyone's soaked. Someone sneezes. You present your damage report, 22% of grain lost, 3 animals unaccounted for, 2 tablets missing, and at least one priest who may or may not have slipped and claimed divine injury for extra rations. They nod grimly. The high priest's assistant asks the real question, can we still feed the gods? You check your figures. Yes, you say. Barely. The relief is visible. Not because anyone thinks Enlil will throw a tantrum, but because people will. If the gods don't eat, someone's getting blamed, and it's usually not the guys in the golden hats. You're dispatched to oversee the food redistribution. You adjust barley rations, prioritize fresh oil, and recommend shortening the midweek offering list. Maybe Enki can skip the figs this once. You draft the change as a formal amendment, wording it just politely enough that no one thinks you're cutting corners, just adapting with reverence. Later in the day, a delegation from a neighboring district arrives. Their road washed out, their stores ruined. They ask, politely at first, if the temple can send food. You look to your supervisor. He looks to you. You consult your figures. You could spare a portion. But it'll be tight. You suggest a compromise, send grain with a request for reciprocal support during the summer droughts. He nods. The delegation agrees. A treaty is drafted on the spot, cuneiform diplomacy in action. You press your goat seal at the bottom, and for a moment, you feel like a real power player. By late afternoon, the sun comes out. The waters recede, leaving behind mud, broken baskets, and a few stranded frogs. Cleanup begins in earnest. You find yourself back in the storerooms, shoulder to shoulder with laborious, rest-tacking jars and triple-checking surviving tablets. Your hands are blistered. Your robe is ruined. But your ledgers are balanced. There's a strange satisfaction in that. You think back to something your first instructor once said, in disaster, scribes do not run, they reorganize. You thought it was a joke. Today, It feels like a motto. You sit on an overturned jar, finally catching your breath. Someone brings you a small cup of warm beer and half a date cake. It tastes like triumph. You glance at the drying tablets by the sun-warmed wall. Each one a snapshot of chaos managed, resources preserved, sacred order restored. You didn't pray today, not really. You didn't need to. You worked. And in Sumer, that's sometimes the holiest thing of all. You're sipping your breakfast beer, thin, bitter, and room temperature, just the way nobody likes it, when a boy bursts into the courtyard with eyes wide and sandals flapping. Message from the palace. The words alone are enough to make several scribes choke on their barley cakes. Palace business isn't temple business. It's worse. You set down your cup, wipe your hands on your tunic, and take the clay envelope from the breathless courier. It's sealed with the unmistakable imprint of royal authority. A lion devouring an eagle, ringed by cuneiform so sharp it looks freshly bitten into the clay. You crack the outer shell open carefully and read the message inside. Your stomach drops. The king wants a tax report. Specifically, the last 3 moon cycles of temple revenues, grain outputs, and livestock counts, plus a breakdown of labor contributions, merchant tariffs, and religious donations. By sunset, you look up at the sky. It's barely past dawn. You do the math. You might survive this. But only if nobody talks to you, distracts you, or so much as breathes near your workspace. Time to build a tax document fit for a king. You race to the archives, where the last 3 months of tablets are stacked in a series of clay cubbies with laughably vague labels like barley, probably, and stuff from that one festival. You've begged them to adopt a better filing system. You even color-coded once. They said it was unholy. You sort quickly, eyes scanning symbols with practiced ease. Tally sheets. Ration logs. Trade records. You find one tablet detailing the Great Lentil Overflow of mid-spring and another ominously titled Owl Incident, Do Not Reshelve. Still, you gather what you need. You spread out the tablets in the sunlit courtyard and start transcribing the raw data into one clean, authoritative record. It's slow going. The numbers don't always agree. One priest logged 100 units of barley, another listed 85. You send a boy to go count the sacks. He returns with news, it's 93. You average it and add a note, rounding adjustment due to inventory conflict. Very official. Historians still argue whether these royal tax requests were regular administrative oversight or strategic power moves to keep temples in check. Either way, they're terrifying. You work through midday. The sun bakes your neck. Clay dust clings to your wrists. A merchant tries to ask you about a delivery, and you shush him so hard he backs away like you've cursed his sandals. You're in a flow state now. You're not a person. You're a walking abacus with trust issues. Quirky temple tax fact: sometimes donations to the gods, like grain, beer, or livestock, were rerouted to the palace for divine redistribution. Which is a very polite way of saying the king gets a cut. You include these in your report, carefully noting the amounts so no one accuses the temple of shortchanging heaven. By early afternoon, you're halfway done. You take a break under the shade of the ziggurat, nursing a cup of date juice and mentally rechecking livestock figures. You're not sure if 2 donkeys are double counted or if someone's donkey simply has 2 names, Weasel and Glory of Enlil. You decide to list both, with a footnote. Let the palace sort it out. Then comes the real challenge: formatting. The king expects not just accuracy, but elegance. Royal scribes are trained in flourished cuneiform. Fancy stuff. You don't have time for perfection, but you angle your stylus just right, spacing the symbols cleanly, adding delicate line breaks. You roll your personal seal at the bottom. Then you wrap the tablet in a thin clay envelope and seal that with the temple's official cylinder. It depicts two divine bulls shaking hooves over a sheaf of wheat. Classy. You call the same courier boy, who's been napping behind a statue. Run this to the palace, you say. Do not drop it. He nods solemnly and takes off down the street, arms pumping like he's carrying divine judgment itself. You sag against the temple wall, exhausted. But the day isn't over. A few hours later, the courier returns, terrified. They want clarification, he pants. About the merchant tariffs. Of course they do. You dig back into the archive, find the relevant trade tablets, and realize, great, the copper weights used in one entry were misrecorded. Instead of standard shekels, the merchant used half shekels and a lot of vague hand-waving. You adjust the numbers, reformat, and send the courier running again. There's a moment, just a moment, where you think the report might come back with royal approval. Instead, just before sunset, a third message arrives. The king's chief accountant has requested a follow-up. Specifically, a cross-reference of this month's labor contributions with the canal maintenance crew logs. You close your eyes, count to 4, and start again. Because that's how this job works. You are the invisible hand behind the throne. The inkless accountant. The quiet voice of logic in a world that believes thunder is divine yelling. Without your ledgers, the palace collapses into confusion. The king doesn't know it, but you just prevented a dozen small rebellions over unpaid work and underreported barley. You finish the final clarification as the moon rises. No one thanks you. No one even notices. But the temple breathes easier. And so do you. You return to your mat late, head spinning with numbers. Your stylus is worn nearly flat. Your hands ache. But you feel something else, too. You managed it. You delivered truth in tablets. And in Sumer, that's the highest offering of all. There's a knock at your door before sunrise. That's never a good sign. You roll off your mat, bones creaking like a badly fired brick, and crack open the curtain. It's a temple guard, nervous, sweating, and holding a clay envelope. Private commission, he mutters. From the Merchants' Guild. Needs your seal. Quietly. You rub your eyes. It's not even breakfast. He shrugs. They're paying in silver. Ah. Silver. The closest thing to motivation that actually works around here. You take the tablet and glance at the inscription. It's a loan agreement. Substantial. Someone's borrowing enough to fund a caravan to the Gulf and back, with interest, collateral, and a guarantee backed by the temple's name. Which means if this goes wrong, someone will blame the gods. And you. You grab your satchel and head out, chewing on a barley cake as you walk. Welcome to the lucrative, shadowy world of freelance scribing, the side hustle of every ambitious temple scribe who doesn't want to spend their whole life counting goats. The merchant quarter is already bustling. Traders from the east unload bundles of dyed wool and copper ingots, while Sumerian brokers haggle like their lungs are connected to their wallets. The smell of fish, sweat, and hope hangs in the air like a cloud that's never heard of soap. You meet your client in a private courtyard behind a perfume shop. He's well-dressed, eyes sharp, fingers covered in gold rings that clink as he hands you more tablets. We're funding 2 caravans, he says. 1 to Elam, 1 to Marie. I need contracts for both, with clauses for theft, weather delays, and curses. Just in case. You raise an eyebrow. Curses. He shrugs. The last shipment lost 3 camels and a crate of ivory. Nobody can explain it. Might have been bandits. Might have been divine punishment. Best to cover our bases. You start drafting immediately. Loan terms. Payment schedules. Penalties for misdelivery. Clauses about sacred cargo, spices for the temple, dyed cloth for rituals, exotic animals for the high priest's private menagerie. You include the standard protection spell language. Let the gods curse he who breaks this seal with boils, blindness, and bureaucratic error. Historians still argue whether these contracts were legally enforceable outside the temple courts or just elaborate scare tactics. Either way, you've seen firsthand how a well-worded clause can stop an argument faster than a dagger. Quirky detail: for high-risk ventures, merchants sometimes add symbolic gestures like burying a small clay tablet under the loading platform as a witness tablet. You're asked to inscribe one. It just says, "The gods are watching." Subtle. After 2 hours, your fingers ache but the contracts are ready. The merchant nods in approval and presses his seal onto each one, a scene of a lion drinking from a jug while a priest watches. You're not sure what it means, but it's very confident. He pays you in silver rings, each carefully weighed. You thank him, tuck the rings into your pouch, and start the long walk back toward the temple. And just as you round the ziggurat, your old supervisor catches you. "That wasn't temple business," he says, eyeing your pouch. You smile politely. "Neither is your fourth robe, Bezhal." He blinks. "Touché. The truth is, most scribes do outside work. It's barely a secret. But as long as you keep your temple duties spotless and don't drag the gods into shady contracts, no one cares much." Back at the temple, the day isn't done. You're pulled into a quick audit meeting with the canal team. Apparently, the laborers from the outer district claim they worked twice the hours listed on last month's ledger. You check. They didn't. But the foreman did underpay them and list the extra hours as divine delay compensation. You roll your eyes and adjust the ledger, noting exaggerated labor hours adjusted to known work pace. Later, a priest asks you to write a love poem for a friend. Something subtle, he says, but also seductive, but still sacred. You sigh. This again. You spend an hour drafting something about palm trees and rivers and how your voice is like barley in bloom. It's terrible. He loves it. You get paid in honey cakes. You spend the rest of the day alternating between temple work and private requests. A land dispute between two wealthy families. A citizenship confirmation tablet. A divorce clause involving the division of a goose coop. You navigate each one with precision and the weary resignation of someone who knows how fragile clay can be. By sunset, you're sprawled under the fig tree in the temple courtyard, watching the last light catch on the bricks. A junior scribe walks past with ink-stained fingers and a confused look. You wave him over and help him fix a glyph that has been carving backward all week. He grins in thanks and dashes off. You smile. You remember that look, that thrill of mastering something that used to feel impossible. You pull out your stylus and scribble in your private journal tablet. Not for clients. Not for the gods. Just for you. Today I earned silver. Today I dodged Bezhal. Today I taught someone how to write wheat without crying. You set the tablet beside you, let the breeze cool your face, and close your eyes for a moment. Freelance work may be messy. It may be risky. But it's freedom. And in a city of sacred laws, sealed contracts, and gods with dietary needs, freedom tastes like silver, ink, and maybe, just maybe, a few minutes of quiet at the end of the day. You're deep in temple inventory, halfway through recalculating the incense rations for the next full moon festival, when a guard appears, clearing his throat like he's about to deliver a funeral notice. You brace yourself. "The omens are bad," he says. You blink. "Which omens?" He leans in. "All of them." "Right. Great." You follow him to the temple's upper chamber, a room that always smells like old feathers and burning cedar. The senior diviner is hunched over a steaming basin of oil, frowning so hard his wrinkles are casting shadows. Around him are sheep livers, ash-covered tablets, and a single trembling apprentice holding a stylus like it might bite. "We need records," the diviner mutters. "Historical comparisons. Fast." "Ah, yes." Prophecy management, that lovely time when scribes are pulled into the hazy world of omens, portents, and vague disasters that may or may not happen but definitely require documentation. You're handed a clay slate and ordered to retrieve recent irregular celestial records, past eclipse patterns, and known misfortunes linked to unusual bird behavior. You run. First stop, the Temple Astrology Archive. It's dusty. It's chaotic. And every tablet is labeled with poetic but deeply unhelpful names like the moon spoke twice and when stars frowned upon Lagash. You eventually find a series of eclipse reports, one with a margin note that reads, "This is the one with the sheep that exploded." You take it. Just in case. Historians still argue whether Sumerians truly believed omens dictated policy or whether it was more of a priestly form of early lobbying. But to you, it feels real enough. People panic when birds fly wrong. People panic when the moon skips a beat. And when people panic, they blame scribes if they don't get their prophecy paperwork fast enough. Back upstairs, the diviner is mid-lecture. When entrails twist to the left, the gods whisper of betrayal. Everyone nods solemnly. Even the sheep liver seems on edge. You hand over the eclipse records, along with a quick summary tablet that outlines celestial trends, rainfall deviations, and a rather suspicious spike in owl sightings. The diviner murmurs thanks and begins waving the stylus like a wand. You back away slowly. You've done your part. You're not trained in prophecy, but you are trained in cross-referencing. Just as you think the drama's over, a junior priest flags you down. Someone needs to write the official warning. Of course they do. You sit under a flickering oil lamp and begin drafting the proclamation. It must sound concerned, but not panicked. Vague, but urgent. Something like, "Let the people of Uruk remain watchful. The skies have spoken, and the temple prepares the rites. Secure your granaries. Keep your goats close. Avoid unnecessary journeys after dusk." You tack on a poetic closing, "May the winds favor the humble and the wise." They love that stuff. Quirky detail. Prophetic events are often commemorated with symbolic offerings, such as tying reeds into star shapes or sacrificing a sheep with one extra tail, if you can find one. You are asked to scribe a ritual checklist, which includes 1 white-robed priest, 2 wind flutes, 3 large onions, uncut, 4 temple virgins, awkwardly vague qualifications. By midday, the temple is buzzing. Someone heard a dog howl 3 times in a row and claimed the gods were announcing a flood. Another claimed the ziggurat's shadow fell too far east and began gathering sandbags. You calmly point out that it's just cloudy. They ignore you. You retreat to your office and attempt to return to incense counts. You fail. Because now someone's asked for an omen-to-outcome chart. For education, they say. And maybe insurance. You dig through old records. There's a pattern. Owl seen at midday equals 3 weeks of minor illness. Moon haloed twice equals someone in the palace gets demoted. 2-headed goat born equals you do not go outside for a week. Stars form a line equals possible romance, but probably war. You organize the findings into a tidy little table and send it up the chain. Someone adds it to the public display board in the plaza. A crowd gathers. A baker faints. Eventually, the high priest makes a public appearance to interpret the signs. He waves your tablet around like it's divine scripture. He declares that, yes, something may be coming, but if the proper offerings are made and if the populace remains pious, clean, and generous to temple scribes, then the gods might grant mercy. You quietly enjoy that last bit. The offering list is posted. Grain, beer, and prayers. Lots of prayers. As the sun sets, you help a few junior scribes record the day's events in the Omen Ledger, a long, heavy tablet that chronicles every suspicious sneeze, shooting star, and sheep that looked funny in the eye. You write slowly, carefully, each wedge of the stylus echoing the weight of collective superstition. And you can't help but admire it. This belief, this enormous, trembling infrastructure of signs and patterns, is ancient humanity's way of taking control. Of pretending that if they read the world just right, they can stay one step ahead of disaster. You're part of that system. You don't predict the future, but you record its warnings. And when the birds fly too low or the rain smells like copper or a goat says something suspicious, you'll be there, stylus ready, pressing fear into clay so it doesn't have to stay in the heart. You are woken by singing. Not the good kind. Not the soft, pre-dawn hymns of the temple girls or the murmured incantations of the incense priest. No, this is drunken singing, loud, off-key, and dangerously close to your archive room. You scramble upright, grab your robe, and stumble outside to find 4 junior priests and a merchant's son performing what can only be described as a blasphemous parody of the Enki creation hymn, featuring a goat, a fish, and far too much barley beer. One of them is leaning against your record's tablet like it's a pillow. You let out a sigh that could crack clay. It's the first day of the Festival of Abundance, a week-long celebration that begins in reverence, proceeds into chaos, and ends with a hangover so powerful it deserves its own temple. And somehow, as one of the temple's scribes, you're expected to document the whole thing. You spend your morning herding semi-conscious acolytes out of restricted areas and rescuing half-finished tablets from being used as coasters. The main plaza is already filling with people, merchants, farmers, children, all dressed in their festival best. Flowers wound into braids, painted sandals, offerings of honey, fruit, and suspiciously flat bread. The high priest opens the ceremony with a prayer to Enlil, arms raised dramatically toward the rising sun. You take notes while also calculating how long it will take before someone sets something on fire. You're not far off. By mid-morning, a fire dancer accidentally ignites the hem of a ceremonial curtain. It's quickly stamped out by a passing potter, who is immediately hailed as a hero and offered 6 cakes and a kiss on the cheek. He accepts both. You're approached by the festival overseer, an elderly man with eyebrows like tumbleweeds, who hands you the ceremonial ledger. "You'll be our event archivist this year," he says. "Oh no. This means you'll be recording everything. Rituals, guest offerings, official speeches, unofficial speeches. You'll need to be everywhere at once and still have enough clarity of mind to write it all down before your stylus melts from overuse." You get to work. First, the parade. You stand on a platform as the divine procession moves past, priests carrying statues of the gods on decorated carts, musicians playing bone flutes and double-headed drums, and dancers tossing flower petals into the crowd. Behind them, temple laborers carry trays of grain, fruits, smoked fish, and sweets, symbolic offerings to ensure another year of bounty. You jot down. On the 12th day of Samanu, the people of Uruk marched under banners of gold and blue, bearing gifts and prayers. The statue of Inanna was nearly dropped by a sneeze, but divine steadiness prevailed. Historians still argue whether these festivals were state-sponsored political tools or spontaneous bursts of public piety. You suspect it's both, and also an excuse to wear the good sandals. Quirky detail: there's a traditional skit reenacted each year where a farmer argues with a herdsman about who contributes more to the city's wealth. The argument always ends in a staged wrestling match, and it's always the herdsman who wins. No one knows why. Possibly divine favoritism. Possibly better hair. You record the skit faithfully, trying not to laugh when the farmer trips over a gourd and ad-libs a curse so creative you immediately write it down for future use. Next comes the offering ceremony. People line up to give their thanks to the gods. Baskets of barley, jugs of wine, carved trinkets, woven cloth, even a live duck that flaps indignantly every time it's lifted toward a statue. You're in charge of tallying all gifts in the festival offering register. There are some inconsistencies. A merchant tries to pass off dyed wool as imported silk. A child tries to offer a very angry frog. You gently redirect them both. Maybe next year. Midday heat presses down like a clay lid. The plaza shimmers. You pause for water, then continue recording. At the 6th hour, the people danced. Their feet rose like doves, their voices rang like temple bells, and the duck escaped again. All was joy. And it is joy. Even through your fatigue, you feel it. The pulse of the crowd, the shared laughter, the way people beam when their offering is accepted, the beat of the drums echoing through the streets. This is why you write it down. Not for the high priest. Not for the gods. For them, the people who don't keep ledgers, who don't make clay tablets, who will remember this day by smell and rhythm and stories told to grandchildren. But they'll forget dates. Names. What year it was. Who was king. Whether the duck made it. And that's where you come in. As the sun dips low, the closing ritual begins, the lighting of the sacred torch. A young priest carries the flame up the ziggurat steps, wind catching in his white robes. Everyone watches, silent now. The city seems to hold its breath. He lights the topmost torch. A cheer goes up. Horns blast. The festival is officially sealed. You write. And so the light was raised, and Uruk rejoiced. The gods had their feast. The people had their dance. The duck was not found. You hand the final ledger to the temple steward, who beams at you like you've just carved the 10 Commandments into a lentil. You're offered a sweet cake and a moment of peace. You take both. Later, you sit by the reflecting pool, feet aching, stylus worn down to a nub. Someone is still singing in the distance, slower now, more thoughtful. A lullaby. You lean back, gaze at the stars reflected in the water, and feel, somehow, that the city is alive in your clay. Every laugh, every sneeze, every offering and joke and duck. You've made it real. And maybe that's what it means to be a scribe, not just to record history, but to hold joy in your hands long enough to press it into eternity. The morning after the festival is always the same. Silence. Blessed, sticky silence. The kind that comes after the drums stop, the beer runs out, and the gods themselves seem to be sleeping in. You step over a toppled garland and a wilted onion and make your way to the temple's southern annex, where a meeting has already begun. No music. No fanfare. Just the dull thud of clay tablets being thumped onto a stone table by a man who clearly did not sleep last night. Land disputes, he says, as though the words physically hurt him. You sit down, pull out your stylus, and brace yourself. Because now, you've entered the domain of legal scribing, where truth is squishy, memory is optional, and everyone suddenly becomes a witness. Today's case. A farmer claims that his neighbor moved a boundary stone during the night, stealing 3 rows of barley field. The neighbor claims the farmer's ox wandered, and that the gods meant for the new boundary to be where the ox chose to poop. The ox, for the record, is unavailable for testimony. You begin by writing the formal case title. Concerning the land of Lagash border dispute in the year of the Great Canal Repair. Historians still argue whether Sumerian courts were truly impartial or mostly power performances. What's clear is that the scribes were essential to making things look fair. You jot down both men's testimonies. You sketch a crude map in the margin, mostly rectangles, with a small dot for the sacred fig tree that both parties claim to own. One man insists the tree leans west. The other swears it bows east in reverence. You don't comment. You just write. The judges, temple elders and one unusually alert goat confer quietly, asking for witness tablets, prior land seals, and any existing curse declarations attached to the soil. You're sent to the archives to retrieve the older boundary records. There, deep in the dust of forgotten years, you find a clay tablet from the previous land agreement. It's clear. The stone hasn't moved. The river has. Just a little. But enough. You return with the proof. The judges nod. The verdict is issued. The boundary stays where it was. The river doesn't make the rules. You scribe the judgment, press your seal, and hand it to both men. One grumbles. The other smirks. Both bow, grudgingly, and the goat eats part of the ceremonial ribbon. Next up, a will dispute. An old merchant passed away and left his estate to his son. But the daughter claims she was promised the family donkey, Glory of Ninhursag, and that her brother forged the will. You check the tablet. It's suspiciously neat. The script looks like it was written by someone trying very hard to look official. You ask to see another document in the brother's hand. It's a mess. He writes like a drunk spider. Gotcha. You don't accuse him outright. You simply note, unusual script consistency. Suggest cross-reference with prior verified documents. The court agrees. The donkey goes to the daughter. The brother sulks. Glory of Ninhursag brays triumphantly from the temple stables. Quirky detail. In legal cases involving livestock, animals are often brought into court for presentation. You once scribed a contract while staring directly into the eyes of a sheep named Excellent Judgment. You still have nightmares. Later that day, a woman arrives requesting a name change for her son. The gods have spoken, she insists. He shall now be called He Who Walks with Lightning. You explain the name will not fit on standard tablets. She insists. You compromise with Walks with Lightning, which fits barely and somehow makes the boy sound like a very small warrior. Then comes the most delicate task of the day, a marriage contract. Two nervous young people sit before you, blushing and stealing glances. Their parents, on the other hand, are loud and overly enthusiastic. You draft the agreement slowly, carefully listing dowry items, including 5 amphorae of wine, a set of ceremonial combs, and a very fancy goat, along with shared property clauses and the standard fertility blessings. At the end, you include the optional clause, "May this union be strong as baked brick and sweet as temple incense." They smile. You don't, but your stylist does. As you wrap up your duties, you're handed one final case. A man claims his neighbor's roof shadow extends too far over his courtyard, violating personal light space. You stare at him. He insists this is a sacred matter. His plants are sad. His soul is wilting. He demands architectural justice. You document the complaint. You also recommend he consider growing mushrooms. By the time the sun is setting, you've written 7 official rulings, resolved 2 inheritance claims, authorized 1 name change, and witnessed what might be the world's first real estate shadow war. You clean your stylus in the temple fountain, watching ripples fan out like invisible ink. You wonder how many futures you've shaped today, how many lives have been redirected by a few wedges of pressure in the right corner of a tablet. You're not a judge. You don't decide what's fair. But you do decide what lasts. And that's its own kind of power. Tomorrow, someone will forget what was said. They'll claim a goat never existed or a promise was made under divine starlight or that the wind erased their debts. But the tablet will still be here. And so will your quiet little wedge marks, humming softly beneath the dust. Your mid-bite into a hard date cake, crunchy, borderline violent, when a novice scribe bursts into the archives. Emergency inscription, he pants. Royal edict. Needs immediate engraving. You stare at him, crumbs falling like ash from your lips. On clay. No, he gulps. On stone. Ah. You sigh, dust off your tunic, and follow him outside, where the sun is already doing its best impression of a divine furnace. A freshly cut slab of limestone leans against the courtyard wall, sweat already dripping from its blank, pale face. A royal herald is waiting beside it, smug as a goose on a roof. The king desires a public proclamation, he announces, handing you a wax tablet. It must be legible, majestic, and praise his latest canal improvements. You read it. It's long. Suspiciously long for someone whose idea of canal management is waving at mud. Still, your job is not to question. Your job is to immortalize nonsense in stone, a uniquely Sumerian skill. You trace the outline first with charcoal, planning the space like a very stressed god playing Tetris. Each line of cuneiform must be even, consistent, and carved deep enough to survive a sandstorm or an angry mob. You pick up the bronze chisel. Tap, tap, tap. It's slow, brutal work. One symbol at a time. Each triangle wedge must be struck with just enough force to bite the stone, but not enough to split it. Your wrist begins aching by the third sentence. By the fifth, your shoulder is plotting rebellion. By the 10th, you've learned the exact sound of a chisel hitting your will to live. Still, you persist. Because this is what makes your work permanent. Clay dissolves. Ink fades. But stone, that's forever. Quirky detail. Elite stonemasons sometimes added secret symbols to their engravings, tiny dots or flourishes that marked their work. You're tempted to include a single, subtle duck glyph in the corner. For the culture. Around noon, a group of children gathers to watch. One whispers, "He's writing the king's secret." Another corrects him, "No, he's making the stones talk." You like that one. You keep chiseling. By decree of His Majesty, King Lugal-Zagassi, Lord of Kish and Harvester of the Marshes, let it be known that the Eastern Canal, once choked with silt and despair, now flows free under divine favor and state funding. You chisel this entire sentence while quietly wondering if anyone ever told the canal. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were truly meant for the public or simply monumental ego projects. Either way, they're hard to miss, especially when they're 10 feet tall and facing the market square. Mid-afternoon heat makes the stone hiss. You wrap a cloth around your wrist and keep going. It's oddly meditative, like each symbol is a breath, a heartbeat, a reminder that someone, someday, will run their fingers over these words and ask, "Who carved this?" The answer, of course, is you. But you'll never be named. That's not how this works. Stone tablets don't credit the scribe. Your signature is the shape of the letters, the balance of the line, the way the spacing just barely hints at elegance. It's anonymous permanence. You pause for water. Your fingers are trembling, coated in dust and tiny white chips. You check your progress. 12 lines down. 5 to go. Almost there. A merchant passing by squints at the half-finished text. Did he really fix the canal? You shrug. The stone says so. He nods, accepting this logic entirely. You return to work. Let future generations know, where there was once mud, there is now trade. Where reeds tangled, now boats glide. Praise the throne. Praise the bricks. Praise the guy who carved this. Okay, you don't write that last part. But you think it. By sundown, it's done. You step back and admire the slab. It gleams in the golden light, each symbol catching a flicker of warmth before the shadows reclaim it. The herald returns, inspects it with a theatrical nod, and waves for porters to haul it to the city plaza. You follow them. At the center of the square, the stone is hoisted onto its pedestal. Children cheer. Priests mutter blessings. A man sells honey-soaked bread with a sign that reads "Official Canal Celebration Snack." And there it stands, your work. Public. Proud. Unmovable. You sit on the edge of a well and rub your hands. They ache in ways you didn't know were possible. But there's something deeply satisfying in it. You've carved the king's name into history. Not for glory. Not for pay. But because that's what scribes do. You don't chase power. You don't demand credit. You write. You record. You preserve. And sometimes, you make the stones talk. You wake before the city. Not because you want to. Because the archivist's apprentice mistook a jar of ceremonial oil for ink, and now 3 weeks of inventory tablets smell like temple offerings and stick to your fingers like honey. You mop up the mess, grumbling softly, then settle at your desk. There's a quiet stillness in these early hours, a kind of gentle murmur beneath the silence, as if even the bricks are whispering to each other, 5 more minutes. But not for you. Today is audit day. Every moon cycle, the temple scribes gather to compare records, rations issued, donations received, labor hours logged, livestock births and deaths, and of course, your favorite, discrepancies. So many discrepancies. You carry your tablets to the courtyard, where stone benches form a rough square under a dusty awning. Senior scribes, junior clerks, and one extremely uninterested cat have already assembled. Someone is chewing noisily on a figure. You try not to judge. You fail. The head scribe opens with a prayer to Nabu, patron god of wisdom and writing. His voice cracks halfway through, possibly due to age, possibly due to spite. You all bow anyway. Then begins the math. You cross-check entries on barley stores. One temple log says 120 sacks. Another, entered by young Dumuzi, who has the attention span of a breeze, says 102. You raise an eyebrow. Dumuzi turns pale. You recount the tally sticks, examine the clay seals, and conclude, rats. Actual, documented rat theft. Again. You note the loss, subtract from the total, and recommend the placement of a cat. The uninterested one cleaning itself under the fig tree seems qualified. A clay courier arrives mid-morning with a request from the neighboring temple of Ninurta. They'd like to borrow a set of flood maps your archive compiled 3 years ago. You say yes, but request they return the tablets clean, unlike last time when they came back covered in honey and what might have been sandal prints. You send a junior scribe to escort them. You don't trust other temples with your tablets. No one should. Next comes the labor log. There's a wrinkle. The men who dug the Eastern Canal extension last month were promised 3 beer rations per day. They received 2. And now their foreman is here, pointing at your tablet and insisting it was a clerical misunderstanding. You pull up the original contract. 3 beer rations per son. You point to the word 3. He sweats. You revise the current week's ledger to add a retroactive ration bonus. Fair is fair. Also, angry canal diggers have shovels. Historians still argue whether scribes in temple bureaucracies had true authority or were just highly caffeinated record keepers. But here, now, in this courtyard of tablets and truth, you hold real power. Not because of your voice, but because of your records. You make the past speak. And it doesn't lie politely. Quirky fact: temple scribes often embedded small jokes into routine documentation. One tax record from Nipper ends with the phrase, "And if this math is wrong, may the next scribe grow a beard on his eyelids." You sympathize. Later, a junior scribe presents his year-end summary. It's riddled with duplicate entries, a few missing seals, and one baffling margin note that simply says "Do not trust chickens." You pull him aside, gently explain the importance of clarity, and hand him a fresh clay tablet. Again. Neatly. You glance over at your own apprentice, who's busily copying a temple hymn in the corner, tongue sticking out in concentration. You smile. You remember that feeling when the stylus feels too big, the glyphs swim before your eyes, and every correction feels like personal failure. You almost tell him it gets easier. Almost. Instead, you check his tablet, tap the margin, and say, "You're missing a breath mark. Here. Between Enlil and thunder. Unless you want to make the god hiccup." He laughs. Fixes it. That's how the next generation learns. 1 mark at a time. By late afternoon, The courtyard is littered with drying tablets and half-finished audits. You're sore, sun-drenched, and a little dizzy from inhaling clay dust all day. But it's done. The records align. The numbers match. The temple breathes easy, for now. You stack your tablets, secure them with twine, and carry them back to the archive. The stone shelves greet you like old friends. The whole room smells of time, of silt and parchment and slow-burning oil. You place each tablet carefully into its labeled slot: offerings, grain, labor hours, district east, goats, problematic. You stand back, and there it is. Your legacy. Not a statue. Not a song. A wall of facts. Each one shaped by your hand. And though you know most people won't remember your name, won't ask who logged the grain or untangled the math or noticed the chickens, you know you were here. You are here. In every mark. Every wedge. Every silent record of a city that lived, and prayed, and partied too hard, and tried to understand the world by writing it down. You leave the archive as twilight bleeds across the sky. The city glows in the fading light, ziggurats catching fire-orange edges, market stalls closing down, children chasing each other between half-empty beer jars. You exhale. You've written history. Now it can rest. And so can you. You lie on your mat, finally still. The city outside sighs in sleep. The wind nudges the temple walls like a gentle reminder that even bricks must dream. Somewhere, a dog barks once, decides it isn't worth it, and drifts back into silence. You stretch your fingers, still sore from carving and copying and correcting the world into shape. Every mark you pressed today still sits out there, drying slowly, cooling under moonlight. One by one, little echoes of you. In the quiet, your mind wanders. You remember the duck, always the duck, and the child who tried to trade it for blessings. You remember the glow of torchlight on festival night, how the stone sang under your chisel, how the merchant's son faked his father's will with the confidence of a man who thought stylus work was just scribbling. You smile. The kind of tired smile only scribes know. Because writing isn't just work. It's witness. It's being the eyes that don't blink, the hands that shape silence into story. You didn't conquer cities. You didn't build temples. But you made sure no one forgot who did. And maybe, just maybe, someone in 1,000 years will run their hand across your tablet, squint at your glyphs, and say, "Ah. So this is what mattered." The air cools. You pull your blanket up, feel the weight of sleep folding over your chest. Outside, the temple torch flickers one last time, then dims. A soft hum from the fan, or maybe just the wind, lulls your thoughts away. The city of Uruk sleeps. So should you. Close your eyes. Let the records rest for now. And drift, slowly, into the quiet clay of dreams.